בוקר טוב לכל מי שנכנס כרגע לוובינר. אנחנו נחכה עוד דקה-שתיים בשביל שכולם יגיעו. נרשמו הרבה מאוד אנשים לוובינר הזה, אז אנחנו נחכה עוד ממש דקה-שתיים, אנחנו נתחיל, אנחנו כבר מוכנים, כמו שאתם רואים, אמת כבר איתנו, ואנחנו כבר נתחיל. אוקיי, אתם יכולים בינתיים לקחת דף ונייר, לרשום לכם, אולי במהלך הוובינר תרצו לרשום כל מיני דברים. אנחנו בעצם, באמת ידגים לנו, בוקר טוב, יובל, ידידי, ואנחנו, אתם יכולים לרשום בצ'אט בוקס, אתם יכולים להדליק אותה, פה אנחנו בעצם נשים את כל אנחנו נשים פה את כל מה שאתם תרצו להגיד, לינקים. אוקיי, אז בוקר טוב לכולם, אני שמח שהגעתם, אני שמח ששבת שלום קודם כל, אני מקווה שעצרתם רגע עם ההכנות לקראת שבת, ואנחנו אוקיי, ואנחנו בעצם, אנחנו נתחיל תכף עם הוובינר הזה בעצם, הוובינר הזה, הוא ידבר למעשה, אנחנו נקבל הרצאה של MVP מאט אלינגטון על בניית דוח של רווח והפסד בפאור BI. מאט הוא אחד הגורואים העולמיים בפאור BI, באקסל, בכתיבת דאקס. אני בעצמי קניתי כמה מהספרים שלו, בן אדם מסביר בצורה מצוינת, והוא מגיע אלינו מסידני, ותכף אני אעביר את המיקרופון אליו, ולפני זה בעצם אני רוצה רגע לשתף אתכם, אוקיי, אז קצת כמה דקות על מי אני בעצם, אני מגיע מחברת יוניק, אנחנו עושים מערכות BI בפאור BI לחברות ועסקים, ומעבירים גם הדרכות פנים ארגוניות בחברות ועסקים. אני מזמין אתכם לאתר שלי, אוקיי, uniktech.co.il, וגם להירשם לערוץ פאור BI ישראל, שפה אני בעצם מעלה את כל הוובינרים, וגם סרטונים שאני מעלה בנושא של פאור BI, מן הסתם, פאור BI, דאקס, אוקיי? אז אני מזמין אתכם להירשם לערוץ שלי, וכל פעם שאני מעלה סרטון או וובינר, אתם קבלו כמובן הודעה למייל. אז בואו נתחיל בוובינר, ואני אצרף ואני אעביר את המיקרופון כרגע לידידי מאט אלינגטון, שמגיע אלינו מסידני. אוקיי. Good afternoon, Matt. How are you?
Hi, Shlomi. Great. Thank you very much for the invitation. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to participate in my webinar. Okay, I'm passing you the microphone. Please present yourself, and we'll start the webinar.
Sure. And now I'd like to share my screen, but I don't seem to have the ability to do that. It says my...
Okay, just a minute. Okay.
So try...
Okay.
Oh, hang on. Try again. Okay, here we go. So yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to you all. So it's late in the afternoon here in Sydney, Australia. It's been a very cold day today, maybe about 12 or 13 degrees. So looking forward to a warm evening in front of the TV. So today I'm going to be talking about building a P&L, a profit and loss report using Power BI and DAX, and we'll get into the detail of that shortly. Just briefly, a brief introduction of myself, and for those that don't know me or don't know me well. So my background, I worked at Coca-Cola for most of my business career actually, and it was a great company to work for. In fact, I had the pleasure of coming to Tel Aviv when I was working for Coca-Cola. I met with the bottler there in Tel Aviv, and got to spend a couple of days in and around Israel, which was a great experience. So in the last sort of 6 years, I've been doing this. I've been doing Power BI and Dax, and I got lucky, frankly. You know, I was ready to take on something new just at the time that Power Pivot had become a very solid product, and I decided to invest the rest of my career into this product. And then since then, I didn't even dream that a product like Power BI would come out of the work that had been done on Power Pivot. So for me, the timing has just been impeccable. I've only written one book, but I've updated it twice, and it's also been translated into Korean. So that's why it looks like I've got 4 books, but it's really only one. Although updating a book is quite heavy. Here's a link to my blog as well. I will provide these slides as a follow-up. So if you haven't seen my blog, I share a lot of free material on there, and I encourage you to read those articles as I progress. You know,
I will put a link to the blog and the file itself under the video on the YouTube channel. So
great, thank you very much. Okay. So I just want to start off this session by talking about the way I like to categorize a Power BI project. This is going to be light on slides. I think this is maybe my second to last slide. So there won't be a lot of slides. It's going to be lots of demos using Power BI. But I like to think of self-service BI as operating through these 4 logical stages. And different people have different opinions, but this is the way I think about it. So the first stage is data acquisition. And so this is the process of connecting to your data and getting it into the Power BI database. Now, this is actually quite different than, say, in an Excel world, because in Excel, we sort of open the data and we put it onto a flat canvas, and it's not a database at all. But Power BI is a database. And so this is a significant difference to an Excel world. So this process is called data acquisition, and we use Power Query as the tool to do that, and that's bundled inside Power BI. So then once the data is loaded, it's now in the database, but you can't get the best value from that data until you model the data. So data modeling is the second phase. That's the process of taking the raw data and making it more useful and usable and reusable than it would be in its raw sense. And you're going to see this really clearly today, because I'll show you what you can do with the raw data, which is very limited. And then once you model the data, there's lots of things that you can do over and above. So that's the second phase. And then it's really only then that you can start to visualize the data, to extract the insights, if you like. And then finally, you would typically go and share your reports with somebody else. Now, I'm not trying to imply that this is a purely linear process. The data moves through a linear process from the beginning through to the end, but the project management process tends to be very iterative. So you load some data, you do some modeling, you build a visual, go back and do some modeling, go back and do some visualization, go back and get some more data. We tend to move back and forward through this process. And so the session that I'm going to cover today is not a beginner's session. It's a session with some relatively complex DAX, and we're totally focusing on this modeling step today. But obviously, there's a whole lot of work around data acquisition and visualization. Okay, so that's sort of set the scene. My objective is to show you how to build this P&L, and I will show you the steps of doing this. What's important about this is the process of doing this. So everyone's financial systems are different. You have different chart of accounts, different general ledger. You have different structures for working divisions and those sorts of things. And so there's no one formula that I can write and give to you that will apply to your business. What's important is the process you go through to build the solution. And so for that reason, I'm going to step you through the process that I use to build a P&L. And I literally built this one in preparation for another presentation that I did a few weeks ago. I actually learned to do this from this guy here, Derek Rickard. I met Derek about 5 years ago, and he showed me how to do this. In fact, the data that I'm using here today is actually his data. that he gave to me. And so, but you know, I'm a real believer in learn from other people and then pass the learning on. And that's really what I'm doing today, is passing on what I learned from Derek, but adding my own spin to the process along the way. So you should not expect to be able to end this call and by lunchtime today have your P&L built for your business using Power BI. So it's not a training course, but it should create awareness that it can be done. And we'll give you a link to my blog article that includes all of the DAX formulas that I've written. And with that, and with some review of the video, you should be able to execute the process of building your own P&L if that's what you'd like to do. Okay, so that's it for the slides. So let me come and first of all just show you the data that I'm going to be using. So I have an income or a general ledger effectively. So this is an Excel spreadsheet that's got general ledger data on it. There's about 30,000 rows in this sheet. And then I've got information about which department did the transaction belong to. I've got a calendar table that tells me the month and year, and I've got a primary key and a few other things here. So this is the data. It's in Excel in this case, but it doesn't matter where the data comes from. It could come from Xero or SAP or any financial system. But just to show that that's the starting position. Okay, so let me open up Power BI desktop. And so here is my file. Now, the way I'm going to explain and step through this is I'm actually not going to write any DAX formulas. I've written everything already. But what I am going to do is I'm going to show you the process of incrementally adding the formulas, and how this is literally how I wrote these formulas in preparation for this presentation. And I'll show you the problems and how to use a visual to identify the problems, and then hopefully that learning process will make sense to you. So the first thing to note is that Power BI is a great tool at aggregating data. That is what it does best. If you take a column of numbers, Power BI will add that column of numbers up for you rapidly faster than any traditional database. You can literally have billions of rows of data and get sub-second response. That is what Power BI does really well. So in fact, if I've got, this is a measure, and I'll show you this measure in a moment, but here is my general ledger table. In fact, let me just jump over and quickly show you the data loaded. So here is my general ledger information. It's the same as you saw in the Excel spreadsheet. Importantly though, notice that the names of the tables over here are not the same names as existed in my Excel spreadsheet. The Excel spreadsheet had technical names like dim date, whereas once you load data into Power BI, I highly recommend that you give good business names to your tables so that your end users don't get confused by technical names. So general ledger is a great name for your transaction table. Chart of accounts or accounts is a great name for your header table or for your chart of accounts, etc. So here is my model view. And so in actual fact, I have, these are my dimension tables. This is my single fact table here. You can see I've got one-to-many relationships joining those tables together. And I have this extra table up here, which I'm calling a header table. And I'll explain the purpose of this table as we go through the details. But this table is actually a key to solving a number of the problems that, that the natural behavior of Power BI will not solve on its own. Okay, so with that in mind, I do have this general ledger. So I've got this amount column. So every transaction value is in this amount column. And so in its simplest use, I can just come and grab this amount column, if I can find it here, under general ledger. Here is the amount column. You can see the sigma telling me that it's a column of numbers. If I drop it into the visual, it'll add up those numbers. And as it turns out, I'm getting exactly the same number here as I'm getting from my measure. So this one on the left is a measure. On the right is just the column. I like to call these things implicit measures. So when you drag the column, the the column of numbers automatically gets added up by Power BI. You don't need to tell it to do it. It does it automatically. And this is just the base, most simplistic thing that you can do in Power BI. However, if you want to be good, this is where the Dax language comes in. If you want to get more insights from your data, you have to start your journey of the Dax language. And so here is my formula. So here's my Dax formula, which is simply a sum of that column. So basically, it's exactly the same as that implicit measure. It just adds up all the numbers in the column. So I'm going to remove this column. I'm going to use my measure moving forward. And I'm going to start off by bringing in a column from the accounts table, the chart of accounts, if you like. And once again, you can see it's very fast and efficient to slice and dice the data. So I'm getting a subtotal here for cost of sales, another subtotal for operating expenses, and this just works out of the box. Okay, but having said this, there's a problem. And the problem is that these numbers are not additive in their nature and their behavior. So this is how Power BI works. This is how it's designed to work. But this is not how financial systems in general ledger are designed to work, because we need to treat expenses differently to revenue and that sort of thing. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to jump to my second page here, and we're going to talk about this, this header table. And so this header assignment, there's a few issues here. First of all, the totals are definitely adding up correctly, numerically speaking, but from a P&L perspective, it's not correct. So I'm also it's a bit hard to tell whether these subtotals are correct. And in fact, as we look underneath the hood in a few moments, you'll see that there are actually some issues. Definitely the total is not correct, because we shouldn't be adding expenses to sales and to revenue, etc. And there's another issue here, and that is that the default sorting behavior of Power BI will always sort a column as a alphanumeric. I'm sure many, if not all of you, know that. And so in a financial statement, we don't want this alphanumeric sorting. We need a different way of sorting our columns. And so the way to do that is I'm now going to remove this header assignment column, and instead I'm going to grab a column from my header table. That was the extra table that I showed you. And when I bring this column in, you'll see that this is now sorting more like a traditional P&L, where income comes first, followed by the expense items. I mean, the numbers are still wrong, but at least we're fixing one of the problems at a time. And once again, I sort of implore on you that when you go to solve these types of problems, this is the way to do it. Just cut the elephant into pieces, solve one piece of the problem at a time before moving on to the next problem. I'll show you how I fix this. I'm sure many of you know anyway, this is not the most complicated thing. It's just a matter of coming here, and in the table tools, you click on the header and you use the header sort column as an override. In fact, let me jump here to the next page. So in my header table, I've got the same descriptions as I have inside my chart of accounts, but I've got this additional header sort column, and I'm using this header sort to overrule or override the natural sorting behavior of this column. Of course, the grand total is still incorrect, but at least we fixed one of those problems. All right, so let's move on. We need to take a look at this Dax additive issue, and so we'll move to the next page. And what I've got here is I've got a new measure that gives me the correct total here. So now you can't tell at this stage that this is correct, but I can tell you 28.9 million is the correct amount for the total activity in this table. Now, the way I've solved this is to use another column. This column this time is in the chart of accounts column, and it's just literally a sign column. So if I jump over here to the chart of accounts, and I'll show you the sign column, you'll see that it literally contains one of two possible values. It's either +1 or -1. And we use that to do an on-the-fly conversion of things like expenses. So operating expenses, even though they're stored in the general ledger as positive numbers, and in fact, account as positive numbers, when it comes to adding them up and adding the expenses with the revenue, they need to be treated as negative numbers. And so we need a way of basically at runtime flipping the sign in order to be able to do that calculation. So let me show you what the this formula looks like. So here's the total. It's not overly complicated. This is using a SumX. And the way SumX works, in fact, SumX works a lot like a calculated column. First of all, let's do the calculation for all the negative numbers. For all the negative numbers, let's add up the raw amount and times it by -1. And then after it's done that calculation, it then says, let's go back now and look at all the positive numbers, add up the total amount and times it by +1. And of course, that will have no impact on the sign. And once it's done that, what the sum portion does is add those two values together. So we're effectively flipping the sign using that SumX. Okay, so now we're actually seeing a different number here for the revenue. So notice now that these numbers are the same, it's just the sign has changed. In fact, this one is different. This one's the same. So some of these numbers are different. And so there's another layer of nuance that we need to take a look at, and that's in this subheaders. So let's go ahead and have a look at the subheaders. So we have a subheader column here in the accounts table. So let me go and find that, and I'll bring that in here. And if I bring the this subheader in, you'll notice now that, for example, revenue, even though revenue is a positive number, there are some line items in revenue that are negative. So discounts are negative. They're still technically stored, in this case, under the revenue chart of accounts, but the sign needs to be flipped in the same way that an expense would be flipped. And so that's why after we apply this new SumX formula, this is why we're getting a different total. And so this is correctly working as the logic of the business would suggest. Now, notice that we've got a sorting issue here. So typically, we would always want to see revenue items first, followed by discount items. And so every business would have its own logical order in which they would like to see these things. And so this is once again where we would bring in a subheader sort. And I'm just going to go and change the subheader sort by column to use the subheader sort. And it just automatically updates. It's a pretty easy thing to do. And now we're seeing the revenue item appear first, followed by whatever it is that we need to see. Once again, these sort columns are going to be specific to your business in the way that you want to see the items. Okay, so now we've got a total that looks good. We've got, but now we've got a different problem because accountants basically don't want to see negative numbers in their P&Ls, right? Unless they're truly negative. So even an expense, you would typically want to see that as being 50 million worth of expenses, not negative 50 million as expenses. So we now need to go to the next layer, which is how do we control the display values, the values that get presented to the end user. So let's jump ahead and have a look at the display values. So under cost of sales, we want to see these numbers as positive. Under operating expenses, we want to see these numbers as positive, but for the rest of the numbers, but we still want the total to add up. So I have another column in my accounts table called report sign. And so the sign measure, this was the one that I used to determine whether the numbers needed to be flipped from an aggregation perspective. This column here determines whether the sign needs to be flipped for a report presentation perspective. And so those two things are managed separately so that you can have basically the best of both worlds. And so I've got another measure here called display value. And I think I'll just collapse all of these, and we'll just look at a subset of the items. And so at this point, notice that the display value for sales is now positive, but in the additive column it's negative. Of course, this has an impact here on the total. So the total is wrong. This total is wrong. The correct total is this one. So this is correct, and these are correct, but everything that I'm highlighting in red, or in fact, that one's okay. Everything that I'm highlighting in red is wrong. Everything that I've highlighted in green is correct. So we've got two measures. They both do half the job, right? So the trick is, how do I get the best of both worlds? Also, if I look under, say, revenue, you'll notice that, and let's have a look at operating expenses. So you can see in this case, all of the signs have been flipped. So all of these signs here have correctly been flipped, but notice how these signs haven't changed, because I do want to see these revenue items showing as negative. And this is why we have this additional column. It gives you granular control on an account and sub-account level of what is the additive behavior of this account and what is the display behavior of this account. And it basically disaggregates that business logic into a simple column, which you can just manage in an Excel spreadsheet. And once you load the data, if you just write that formula, which is not, I haven't shown you the formula, but it's basically the same as the previous one. It just steps through it first of all takes all the negative numbers, adds up the total and flips the sign. And then it does the same for all the positive numbers, adds up the total and doesn't flip the sign, and then adds them together. So it just works. It's quite a simple and powerful formula. Okay, so we're getting to this stage where we're starting to get the pieces of the puzzle that we need, but we need to be selective about which ones we use. I want this one and this one, for example. So let's go ahead and have a look at how we address this total here. So I'll jump to the next page. And I have written another Dax measure. Now this one is a little bit more complex, and so let me bring it in and we'll have a look at it. And what I'm going to do with this measure is actually deconstruct the measure. So let me show it to you first on the screen. So now I'm using the variable syntax. The variable syntax in Dax really does make the process of writing and debugging complex formulas so much easier. And I would encourage you, if you're not already using variables, when you're getting into multi-line, multi-component variables, to start using the variable syntax. It's great for writing formulas and it's great for debugging. And so let me show you what I mean. So what I'm going to do here, at the moment the formula is working, but I'm going to go back to the start, and this is exactly how I wrote this formula. So the first thing I did was I wrote this line of code. This says, so the name of the variable is subheader filtered, and I'm using the isFiltered function, which basically returns true or false. And so what I like about variables is I can go and check to see what this portion of the formula is doing. So instead of returning the result, I'm going to return the value of this variable. So let's go and have a look. I'm changing the formula now. It's no longer giving me the same thing. I notice there's maybe a question there. So Shlomi, I'll leave it to you whether you want to interject with that one in a second. And so with this is subheader filtered being returned, you'll notice that we're getting false all the way down here. But when I expand this, I'm getting true. So when I'm at a subheader level within the matrix, I get a true. When I'm not at a subheader level, or in other words, when I'm at the header level, I get a false. So this is a switch that I'm going to use because I need to determine which level that I'm at, and therefore is this what is the appropriate value to show. Was there a question? You're muted too.
Yeah. No, there is not a question. I'll put the link to your blog on the chat. Okay.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. All right, so let's have a look at the second one. So the second one is very similar. So right, the next piece of the puzzle, I need to be able to identify whether I'm at a header level. And this one's slightly different because this is one's returning true at the header level. So these are coming from the header, and it's returning false at the grand total level. And if I drill into the subheader level, it returns true here. So now that I've got both of those, what I can do is I can write this third one, which basically tells me if one of them is true, then return true. So that's what this line says, is if either the subheader is filtered or the header is filtered, return true, otherwise return false. And then what this does is it lets me know exactly, am I at the grand total row in this visual. I get false if I'm at the grand total, and I get true everywhere else. In fact, maybe the previous one gave me the same result. Maybe I didn't even need this. So, but you know, once again, this is the process of solving the problem yourself. And so now what I've done is I've just said, if either of them is filtered, then give me the display value, otherwise give me the amounts that add up. And so if I return the results, and I'll just collapse this. Now you can see that I'm getting the best of both worlds. So I'm getting the 28 million from here, plus I'm getting the additive numbers from here. So neither of these two measures on their own did the job, but just by putting a simple if statement and detecting which level am I at within my matrix, am I at the header, subheader, or grand total level, I'm able to control which one of those numbers is displayed, and I still get the additive behavior. So both measures are being executed under the hood. This gives me the best of both worlds. Okay, so all good. We've now got a nice flowing, correct subtotal for revenue, cost of sales, and so on. But what about the concepts of net sales and gross profit, these things that would typically be visible? They're basically subtotals that occur within this visual. So let's go ahead and have a look at how we solve that problem.
Just a minute, Matt. We have a question. Is there possible to shrink the formula with has one value?
Has one value is another way of doing it. So there's more than one way to write the formula. So I use is filtered, but you could definitely say if has one value, and you could probably put if has one value on the header column. And if there's only, and so yes, I think that's a valid, probably an easier way of doing it. As I said, I sort of wrote this and just built it up. I had in mind what I needed. Now that I just saw that those results again on the screen, I think maybe I've made it more complex than it needs to be. But yes, you could definitely replace it with a if has one value. If there's one value for the header, then that means we're in the matrix, and if there's more than one value for the header, that means we're at the grand total. That would be a single line of code. So yes, I would agree with that.
Okay,
so
that's a great question, and as you said, always there is more than one way to solve Dax, you know.
Absolutely, and you know what? The trick is to solve the problem the way you can, and over time you can improve it and enhance it. And but the important thing is to make progress with what you've got. Okay, so let's take a look at this next problem, and that is that I want to, after revenue and cost of sales, I want to get gross margin, for example, and after revenue, gross sales, returns, and discounts, I want to get net sales, and then after taking into account cost of sales, I want to get gross margin, and then after taking into account operating expenses, I want to get operating profit, and so on. Now, the thing is that these numbers don't exist as a concept inside the table. And that's what I'm continuing to use this header table. Let me just simplify things here. I'm going to remove these two interim formulas that I wrote. We'll just keep this one for now. Let me just collapse everything again. And the natural behavior of Power BI is that if there's no number to display, so if it's a blank row, it will hide that row by default. But you can change that behavior. You can do this in Excel as well, but you can do it in Power BI. So if I click on this matrix and come up to the header, it says I can turn on show items with no data. So if I turn that on, you'll see that I actually do have net sales, gross margin, operating profit as part of this visual. It's just that they have no answer. There is no calculatable value that occurs when we get to the net sales row in this header table, and therefore Power BI hides that row completely. Now I'm just turning this on for illustration purposes. I'm going to turn it off again now. You should leave it turned off, and instead we're going to use Dax to determine when to show the numbers and when not to show the numbers. So if you do, just for testing, turn this on, make sure you turn that off again afterwards. So I've got another Dax formula called running total, because as I'm sure you know, the finance people would know that we need a running total of these items through the chart of accounts to tell us when we get to each of these subtotal levels. And so let me grab my running total measure. And here it is. So at this revenue level, the running total is the same as this one. As it turns out, net sales are the same, but then this running total gets less and less as we start to deduct these additional items. So let me show you the running total formula. It's not super complex. I would call this a custom time intelligence style formula. It's very similar to a custom time intelligence. And so what this formula does is this section here works out which level are we at inside the visual. So let me show you. I mean, once again, this is why I love these variables, is that you can just switch back to a previous step in your formula and actually see what that portion of the formula is returning. So let's go back and have a look at this. And you can see that this first part of the formula gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which is basically this column here. So this part of the formula is its sole purpose of being there. It says, tell me which stage of the visual am I currently in? And so when we get to here, it's saying I'm at the operating profit row, which is number 6. So when we get to number 6, you want to see everything from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 added together as a running total. So, and that's what the second part of the formula says. If I change this back to result, it says, first of all, remove those filters coming from the header table, and then keep everything up until and including whatever number row I am. So if I'm 6, then give me 1 through 6. If I'm 8, give me 1 through 8, and so on. And when it does that, it just does exactly as you would expect it to do. It gives me this nice running total. Okay, so what we really want to do then, as I'm sure you can now see, is that we want this running total here to appear in here. And we want this running total here to appear in here. Whoops, you know what I mean, in here, right? So we just have to go through that exact same process as we did before to selectively determine when do I show the running total and when do I show this magic additive total. And that's what I use this calculate type column here for. So if it's a 2, I want to see the running total. And if it's a 1, I just want to see this magic additive total, the one that we've already built. Okay, so let's go and have a look at that next formula, which is I'm calling correct display amount. And you can see this one does exactly that. It depending on whether it's a 1 or a 2, it returns either the running total or the magic additive total. So, so this number and this number and this number and so on. Same principle as before. I'll show it to you on the screen, but it's, as I said, exactly the same principle. That's not it. It was called correct display, I think. Correct display amount. So just, it's a simple if statement. If it's a 1, then give me the running total. Give me the additive total. Otherwise, by default, it's a 2. I've only got 1 or 2 in my table, and therefore it gives me the running total. Importantly, I'm chopping the problem up and I'm solving each problem one step at a time. I'm not trying to solve world peace in a single formula. I'm just chipping away at the problem, incrementally solving one problem at a time. And then, of course, I can remove these others, these are just here for learning and illustration purposes and for breaking the problem into pieces. Don't need the running total either. So this is now starting to look pretty close to a final P&L. There is something else though. There's another problem. This is very common, and that is that when I get to some of these items, such as gross margin, I'm getting far too much detail here. But really, once I get to the gross margin total, I just want to see the total. I don't want to see this extra detail as a subset of the gross margin. I just want to see the gross margin total. And so that's what the next page that I'm about to show you is designed to solve. And once again, the way we solve it is with another column in the header table. So this column contains a 1 and a 0. You could put A or B. You could basically do whatever you want. I'm just using 1 to say that I want to be able to access the underlying detail, 0 to say I'm not interested in the underlying detail. Don't let the end user see the underlying detail. So once again, pretty much the same process as before. So let's find my total amount. Another thing to notice is that notice how I've named my measures, saving my most valuable name till last. Right, the total amount measure is the one that I want the final report to be using, and therefore I haven't used that as my first measure. I've used it as my last measure name, and I've tried to give these other measures a name that describe what they do. And at the end, once I've finished this process, I would typically hide all these interim measures, just right-click and hide them so that the end user doesn't see them at all, and they just get this one total amount that just works, and they don't need to understand how or why it works. Okay, so now you can see this working, right? So the previous version, the correct display amount, showed me the detail, but this one is hiding the detail. And in fact, if I remove this correct display amount, you'll notice that if I try and expand this gross margin and the net sales, it actually doesn't expand at all now, which is exactly the behavior that I'm looking for here. So let me have a look at let me show you the formula. Now this one is the most complex of all, but it's basically doing the same thing as the magic additive item. And also notice that I put some comments in here to help me understand what each part of this formula does. So first of all, I'm working out whether I've actually combined a couple of the concepts from the previous measure into this final measure. So do I need to display a running total or the simple total? And do I need to show the detail or not, 1 or 0? And do I have a filter at the subheader level? So I need that to control whether to show the subheader detail or not. And then I'm using this switch true statement, which basically says, check each row one at a time. As soon as you find a true statement, then give me that result. And so if subheader is visible and the display code is 0, then that's the cue to hide everything and therefore display a blank. If that is true, then that statement stops executing and it's finished. But if that's false, it goes to the next one and works out, well, if that's false, then it's got to be one of these other two. So which one is it? And it will just display the correct number from there. Okay, so with all of that done, it takes us to this final P&L, which is, I've now added some extra fields here. Let me collapse everything. And so I've got a nice behaving P&L. If I try and drill down on something that has got subheader details, it works. If I drill down on something that is just a subtotal, I'm not expecting to see detail, then that works. I can slice it by year. I can pick on a particular organization. It all just works because we've basically built the solution to solve the problems the way I've described. Okay, so it's about 2:45, so we're pretty much right on time. And so So with the rest of the time, I'm more than happy to take questions or ask, just talk about anything that anyone would like to talk about. If you're interested in doing some Dax training, I've got a few options, which I'll just leave on the screen there, and I'll put, these will be in the slides as well. So, so I do offer training to all parts of the world, including Israel. We have a time zone that basically works for the UK, so I think it picks up you guys maybe a couple of hours before that as well. So pretty civil time of day, probably about 10 o'clock or so. Shlomi, any questions from anyone?
Just I will check just a minute. האם יש שאלות לגבי מה שראינו? לגבי מה שבעצם מאט הדגים של איך אנחנו בעצם יוצרים היררכיה בדוח הזה של הדוח רווח והפסד למעשה, בפאוור BI. אז אם יש לכם שאלות, זה הזמן לשאול, ובחלון הצ'אט, או בחלון השאלות והתשובות, ואנחנו נשמח לענות לכם. אוקיי. Okay, Matt, I asked if there is any other question. It seems that, well, your explanation is great, as always. So, okay.
Any off-topic questions as well? If anyone asks me anything, that's fine as well.
Okay, I think you mentioned that I think all the formulas, all the Dax language, you show us the way of doing it in a measure. Okay.
Yes.
One of the posts that Matt, the early post of Matt, is talked about why using measure and not calculated column. Maybe you can say a few words on that.
Yeah, sure. And it's, I have a blog article. It sounds like at least somebody has read that article. On my website, incidentally, I have this menu here called Knowledge Base, and I've got more than 250 blog articles, which I've shared over the last 6 years. But anything that I think is fundamental to everyone learning Dax to be good, or Power BI, I've covered under this menu here. And so this is great for beginners. These are some of the foundation principles that I think people should learn and understand, because it's the area where people get caught most often. And one of them, this one here, is columns versus measures. And it's something that I'm particularly passionate about. And that's really the root of this question. And in fact, I've become a little bit more accepting of columns over the years. So when I first started, I truly thought that the calculated columns were evil. But what I've learned as I've become more experienced with Power BI is that there's a time and a place for everything. And the best way I could describe calculated columns to people these days is that they can be bad, and particularly when you can use a measure instead. The issue is that most people, not everyone, but most people that I come across in Power BI come from an Excel background. Yeah. And it's so much easier to write a calculated column than a measure because it just works. You jump into that table, it looks like Excel, you write the formula and it works. When you try and write the same formula as a measure, you get an error. I haven't got time to work out what's going on, I'll just do a column. That's the natural self-taught behavior, and that's fine for one calculated column, and it's probably fine for 2, but it's not okay for 100. All right, so because you'll hit diminishing returns, you'll get performance issues, you'll get the file size will blow up, and so on. And so really what I explain in this article is why you should use measures, and I give these general rules of when it's okay to use a calculated column, and they're not overly complex. But my advice to people is to start off with the assumption that it should be a measure, and you'll get it right 95% of the time if you assume that. As you get more experienced, you'll realize that in 5% of the circumstances, a measure is not the best solution. A column is a better solution. So I'll give you one good example, and that is if I want to use a slicer. So if I want to use a slicer, you cannot use a measure. I cannot put a measure in a slicer. So if you need a slicer, it has to be a column. I mean, a good example would be, I don't really know this data that well, but you know, if we had organizations, let's just quickly do something here. Let's bring, I've got the organization here. I'm going to turn this slicer into a table, and I might just bring my total amount item in here. This is not going to work because I haven't sliced it. Maybe I'll just bring the raw amount in. This is not a real example, but you can see how different countries have different amounts. So let's say I want to create a slicer that says small, medium, and large countries. That would be a great example. So I want anything under 10 million to be a small country, 10 to 30 is a medium country, and anything above 30 is a large country. Well, you can't, if you want it as a slicer, you cannot do that as a measure. And so that's a great opportunity to do a calculated column, and it's not difficult to do. So I'll just quickly do it now. So just jump over here, remembering this is not real data, in division. So I can just insert a calculated column, insert new column, and all I have to do is just put in that. So let's call it size of org. Was it? That's not the right one, was it? It was country. As I said, I don't know this data super well. Perhaps if I go and have a look where this comes from. Organization, division, organization. I was right. Division, organization.
Yeah.
Oh wait, okay, sorry, that's my bad. All right, so let's do a new measure. We'll call it size of org. And we can just put that, I can't use the total amount, but I could use the raw amount measure just for demonstration purposes. So when I do this, it's actually going to give me the total. See, now it just goes to show you how much I don't use measure. I wrote that as a measure, and I'm trying to demonstrate columns, and I just do columns so infrequently that I made that mistake. So let me paste it as a column. So column equals the raw amount. Okay, so now it'll work. So this is going to give me a number just telling me the size of the organization, and then I can turn it into a true-false statement. So I could just say if raw amount is greater than or equal to, let's just do 10 million. 1, 2, 3. If it's more than 10 million, then it's large. Otherwise, it's small. And that'll just give me, you know, 2 possible values. This is another example when it's okay to do a calculated column, and that is when it returns a small number of unique values, it's generally considered to be fine, even in a big fact table, no problems at all. And then, so now I've done that, if I turn this back into a slicer, I can bring my size of org into the slicer. This is the new hierarchical slicer thing happening here. All right, so now I can click on just large and small and so on. So that's one good example. But as I said,
so it's better to use the column, a calculated column, and not like measure like in a switch with the switch formula.
Well, you can't. I mean, if you want to put it on a slicer, it has to be a column. You cannot put a measure on a slicer. So switch as a measure will not solve the problem.
Not work.
You could calculate the correct answer in a measure, but you couldn't have a slicer for the end user to select on.
Okay.
And you couldn't put it in as a subtotaling capability within a table or a matrix to basically group all of the large companies together and the small companies and give you subtotals. You know, there's a time and a place for a column, and there's a time and a place for a measure. So I definitely have perpetuated this belief that columns are bad, and I still fundamentally believe that's true, but they're only bad if you use them when you shouldn't use them, and that's very common for self-taught people. But and if you read my article, it will definitely cover the use cases of when it's okay, and explains why. So yeah.
Okay, great. Could please share the...
Can I share the deck? Yeah, so I will send this to you and then you can make it available.
Okay.
Yep.
As I just want to say about something about your blog. הבלוג שלו בעצם הוא בלוג שהוא מאוד מאוד מקיף, הוא מסביר שמה וממליץ ומייעץ בעצם גם בנושאים של דאקס ספציפיים וגם בוא נגיד בלוגיקה איך נכון לעשות את הדברים על פי הניסיון שלו. ואני מאוד ממליץ כמובן על הבלוג שלו ועל הספרים שלו גם כן, אם אנחנו מדברים על הספרים שלו, אז יש לי גם כן אחד מהם. אוקיי, I don't know if you see
yeah, you've
this.
got your screen background, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's that's the original version of my book, and that was written for Excel 2013. And so I now call my books the green book and the red book, green book and yellow book. So the green one is for Excel 16 and the yellow one is for Power BI desktop. Yeah.
I think because a great amount of people coming from the Excel platform, there will be, I think I'm talking for my own, so it's great books for Excel people. They used to be, the platform was Excel till Power BI came to the market. Yeah. Okay, so just a minute, we have some question. Maybe
the books are for sale on Amazon, so I don't unfortunately I don't have shipping capabilities around the world, so if you're in continental USA or Australia, then we can ship directly. Otherwise you pretty much Amazon is the best place to go.
Yeah, there is a question Peleg asked, maybe a simple question, but you gave us a simple idea first with a table for the headings, how to add spaces to the table. For example, add a profit line after gross profit. So,
okay, good question. And so let me just come back and show you the header table. Now we've sort of seen the end-to-end solution. And so basically the header table just contains what you need to see in your model. And so so if you want an additional line, so presumably that, and sorry, I'm not sharing my screen now, am I?
Yeah.
Let me quickly share that again. Sorry, I forgot about that. So here's the header table. And so this table can be whatever you want. I mean, what's important are two things. If the data is additive, such as revenue, then this header column is joining on my chart of accounts with the same word header spelt the same way. That's the key in this case. Now, anything else that you want to see is basically a 2 here. And that 2 means this is a running total, and you can add as many additional rows in here as you need to report on your business. And so this header table was just simply built in Excel based on the logic of the business flow. And what I will say is that this technique works really well as long as you have a clean chart of accounts. Now, not everyone has a clean chart of accounts, and I've seen companies who say, you know, from account number 100 to 400, it's a revenue item, except if it's 397, then that was an old one that we now treating as an expense. And so a chart of accounts is not designed to work that way. It's designed in the order of execution. And if you have exceptions, you will find this very painful. And so now I realize that I mean, you can manage the exceptions. You have to put in a row, like a check whether I'm at that level and then reverse the exception, but you'll get yourself in a mess really quickly. So the best approach is to clean the chart of accounts first, and then everything else will work. One of the problems is because we come from an Excel world, and in Excel, every formula is unique. You can do whatever you want. Who cares if 397 is in the wrong place? We'll just write a formula to fix it, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the way.
So I want to thank you. Matt. Just a minute. I will get some note control first. Okay. Okay, so it's 10 o'clock in Israel, so if you
I definitely have an electronic version of the book, and you can get that from my website. I'd be more than happy. If you just come to my website, here's both versions of the books. Sounds like maybe Excel is maybe more popular. But yeah, so you can just buy from my shop here and immediate download. So yeah, if you buy it, it's $15 US. This is Australian dollars. It's $15 US,
Great.
$14.95. So,
Okay.
and it's a DRM free, so it's a PDF copy, and it will also load onto your iPad or whatever. So we don't have any copy protection. Of course, we ask that you don't distribute, but we also believe that you should be able to use the IP that you purchase on the devices that you want. So we don't lock that down. We just ask that you treat it with respect. That's all.
Okay. Great. So if we don't have any other question, and I see we don't, so I want to thank you very much, Matt, for joining us in this webinar. It was a pleasure to host you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It was great.
Okay, so okay, אז שבת שלום. שבת שלום לכולם. אני הייתי שלומי מחברת יוניק. בקרוב, אוקיי, thank you. אוקיי. אוקיי. אז אנחנו, שבת שלום לכולם, אנחנו נתראה בוובינר הבא. הוובינר הבא מתקיים ביום שני השבוע, שבו אני אערך את אלברטו פרארי, שהוא גם כן גורו עולמי בנושאים של דאקס. I think Matt is familiar with Alberto very well.
He knows, obviously, very knowledgeable guy.
Yeah.
One not to miss, I'm sure.
Yeah. כן, ובעצם הוא אומר שלא כדאי לפספס את הוובינר הזה. אז אני הייתי שלומי, תעקבו אחריי ביוטיוב, הדף פייסבוק שלי, גם שם אני מעלה דברים וחומרים, ויש אפילו קורס שאני ככה מתכנן להוציא לאנשי כספים, Power BI. ותודה שהצטרפתם אליי. Thank you very, very much, Matt. All the best.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, and see you. נתראה.
See you next time.
Next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.